I must credit Tim from Fair Play Now, a YouTube channel, for the inspiration for today's monologue. And thank you, Tim, for putting up what you did on your screen a couple of shows ago. And it made me think, and this morning I did a bit of investigating. I also want to just let people know that in Sussex, in Hope, Sussex, on the 18th of November this year, I and David Edelman, and I think David Zimmerman, are appearing. If you want to come and see us live, do. Are you one of those people, you know, that love to sit down in front of your computer on your own when your partner's not around, or even with your partner, and tune in to, what is it called now? OnlyFans. Yes, that service that provides you the thrill of seeing members of perhaps the opposite sex or the same sex, or perhaps two or three of the same people together, cavorting in front of you for your delectation, I believe. Not that I've actually tuned into that, because I think you've got to pay for it. Being a bit of a skinflint, I've not actually succumbed to handing over any money. But apparently, you know, it must be perfect for those doctors and people studying the body for all of that physical anatomy, you know, because these performers, they show you the whole of the body, and they're often young and nubile, sometimes they're quite old, and you can study the human form in every position imaginable, in every orifice that you've ever wanted to see. So it is apparently quite useful for that purpose. But I think it also has a other purpose, that people who perhaps are dissatisfied with maybe, or just want a bit of a thrill or something, they'll tune into all of that. Now, the reason I say this is because Tim from Fair Play Now, on his splendid videos in which he tells you about his life and some of the thoughts that he has, put up this particular interesting photograph of this rather attractive young woman who was completely generated by AI, artificial intelligence. Now, I'm sure that you've seen how these programs like ChatGPT, I think it's called, you can do your homework, or you can get a history of, or you can even write a book in a matter of seconds, or get text, basically, you know, words, finish off your dissertation by just putting in the number of facts that you want or the subject matter, and it will spew it out easy. Well, it seems also you can generate images as well. In fact, my son, Billy, my youngest son, came round, about 2 or 3 months ago now, and was showing me some amazing pictures that you could generate, putting in the names of places and people and the type of person, and they would come up. Well, when I watched Tim from Fair Play Now's excellent video, and it had this very attractive young lady in it, fully clothed, but very alluring, I wondered to myself, I wonder what this is doing for, this was a woman, of course, and the young lady looked gorgeous. I wonder what this does for young women themselves, if they've now got to compete not only with each other, as you see them on Instagram, desperately trying to outdo each other and getting more and more worried and depressed and anxious about not looking beautiful enough or alluring enough, or not having parts of the anatomy that are big enough or slim enough or whatever, and having all of that thrown at them, that if you can generate amazingly, stunningly gorgeous but really unrealistic women, or men, come to that, let's not be leaving men out of this. There no doubt would be men with these incredible chests and muscles and things, and wonderful hairdos and chiseled chins and lantern jaws, as the old Mills and Boon would have described them back in the day. It must put even more pressure on real, everyday, living people, and making them feel inadequate. And this is something that I think is quite worrying, especially if you then venture into the murky world of OnlyFans and online porn. So as a matter of due diligence for this monologue, I did go to my computer and I put in the term AI, artificial intelligence, porn, pics or pictures or photos, anyway, whichever one it was, I can't remember the term, I was astounded on the results. Now, I can't show them to you because YouTube will shut me down, but it was a bit of an eye-opener. I have to tell you that there is out there on the internet, not only is there genuine pictures of naked men and women cavorting, doing amazing things behind the scenes, and we can talk about what pornography is and how that affects you in another monologue if you so wish. However, I think that this is quite a worrying development now, because what you're seeing is not only complete fantasy, but unrealistic fantasy. Just in the very short time that I investigated, and it was an investigation, ladies and gentlemen, but the creation, it would seem to me, of these absolutely stunning, and I was looking only at women, the stunning women with the anatomy that is really and truly extremely, perhaps you could say, desirable in some sense, but too perfect, maybe also too exaggerated, that is completely unreal in some instances. I mean, many of the pictures that I looked at were real, and you thought, wow, you know, what a lucky young lady she is to look that way, and the makeup department have done her proud, and not a blemish on the skin, and you know, you automatically think, well, that's been photoshopped and things like that. But of course, this has just been generated in seconds, presumably, like AI can do, and has generated, I mean, it's extremely hard to believe that these are not real people, real women. Now, I didn't spend too long on that, but I started to wonder what additional things might happen. And in one of the websites that you went to, it had the thumbnails of potential sets of photographs that you could look at and peruse at your leisure, of strange sort of pixie-like women, and women with additional appendages, let's say, that men usually have. And just on those thumbnails alone, I started to get a very disturbing sense of the mucking about, the AI version of what potentially you could do in real life if you had a top surgeon, for example. I mean, you'd never reach the proportions, I think, and carry it off and be able to live with some of these additional appendages or parts of the body that seem to have been pumped up and inflated and were of a shape that was very alluring and desirable. I'm having to be very careful how I describe this, because I don't want to be crude, although I feel that there was probably, if you search long and hard enough, you would probably find images which would be extremely debasing and not so aesthetic, or let's say a sort of unrealistic romantic vision of people in their natural birthday suit, shall we say. I imagine that there is probably quite debased and grotesque versions of the human body with bits swapped about. I didn't spend too much time on this because, to be honest, my main reaction was, blimey, I didn't know you could do that. Not what they were doing on the screen, that I didn't know. I mean, that was beyond my comprehension anyway, but the fact that we are at a level where you can conjure up pictures of people of both sexes or intersexes with such detail and such ease. And I started to think, what does this do for young people? I mean, somebody of my age who's knocked about a bit can sense that this is unreal, and is, you know, you get to a point in your life where perhaps you've moved on from other things, and this might be just a token thrill, a bit like, well, I'll go there in a minute, but young people, what does this do for them? This exaggeration of the human form, this over perfection of the human body, this unrealistic expectation of trying to achieve something, almost to say that you can't have a partner or a relationship unless you look in a certain way. And now it seems that what we used to have on Instagram and things like that, you've just exaggerated to the nth degree to become almost impossible for anyone. And what does that do to the developing mind who stumbles across these images? And how now can you even tell that what is real and not real when you're online? I mean, it's all very well me as a younger man, and this is, I'll tell you a story. When I was a younger man, 18, perhaps 20, I hadn't really got into relationships at that point, and I was interested in filmmaking. And one of the streets in London that I went up to one day to go, just to go and have a look at, was called Wardour Street. And it's where the big films were edited and offices of filmmakers would be. And I remember going into London one day and walking down there thinking, oh, if only I could be a film director and be affiliated with the filming industry. I loved the whole analog version of it, you know, cutting and splicing and things. But I remember also, of course, Wardour Street in Soho had that reputation at the time of being somewhat seedy and full of clubs. There was the Windmill Club where people used to take their clothes off, but people like Tony Hancock and others would try and ply their trade, and nobody would be paying attention to the comics, but they would be watching the nudes. But you could go in, and I did, to one of these things called a peep show. And it was a very bizarre, I don't know whether they're still there today, probably doesn't exist anymore. And you would go in, and as a young man of the 1970s back then, I suppose, or late 70s, early 80s, I remember going in to one of these peep shows, and it was a sort of a circular or a semicircular entrance, and you went in and there were these cubicles, and you'd go in these cubicles behind a curtain and sit down, and there was this letterbox, and you put 50p in, and this mechanical device would open the letterbox and you would peer in, and for about a minute or so you got to see into a room, and there, writhing on a bed, was a real naked woman. I mean, I dare say if you were the other way inclined, you could see whatever sex you wanted to, but it was a naked woman. You didn't know what she was going to look like beforehand. There wasn't a hoarding to say this woman with all of these accoutrements were going to be there, but it was a naked woman. And for a young man in his 18, 19, it was a thrill. It was an absolute thrill to see a member of the opposite sex, fully developed, say in their 20s or 30s, stark naked, revealing all the bits that you'd heard about or seen in handed down magazines. And if you'd been brave enough to buy one from the top shelf, you know, and be all flushed with red embarrassment. Or had found, as I had indeed as a young man, found stuffed into a hedge. And you'd be opening up these pictures and going, oh, that's what the naked form was. And feeling for the first time that certain sensation going through your body. I was a late developer. I think I've always been a late developer in that line of things because I had other things that I wanted to do, and filmmaking being one of them. However, you see that, and for about a minute, you're, looking at this woman writhing around, never thinking about how awful this was for the woman, of course, lying there and seeing these envelopes opening up and peering at. It must have been absolutely degrading, although she would have been paid a percentage of what she earned that day from the various hungry, dirty, raincoated men and young men who were coming into having gone through puberty and into that sort of motion of blimey, you know, when you're full of virile stuff that you are as a young man. I can't think of the right terminology. But anyway, and then the thing would snap down and you'd go, oh golly, have I got another 50p to put in the meter? Of course, my father being very much a skinflint, that came down with me, and it was like, oh, I can't justify this. and I would walk away, but walk away with that, blimey, I've just seen something rather remarkable. And I do think that the female form, for me, is an incredible and remarkable object, if you like, but not just an object. The woman behind it, of course. It is a remarkable and a very beautiful form that the source, God, the universe, has created in us. And one should be very respectful of that, naturally. But what, going back now to these artificial creations, what does that do? We've seen, I mean, on one level, of course, you've got the worry that people who, on places like OnlyFans, who've moved away from the porn industry. And of course, as a young man working in video and stuff, I've been very aware of what the porn industry was about and how women were depraved and exhibited and very much used for their bodies on VHS tape that would be swapped about or projected into those Soho cinemas of the time. So you were aware of all of that. And then OnlyFans kind of gave those women who didn't want to actually be in front of the camera out of the control of themselves, but in these seedy operations, it gave them, it seems to me, the opportunity to be self-employed, work from home, and if that's the line of business that they want to do, it's not for me to have any moral issues about it. Perhaps it might be that it does give, again, young people a thrill and an introduction. Of course, there is the worry of the whole business of pornography and what that does to the mind and how it affects relationships. But this AI, not only will it probably eventually, when you've got it into images that can move, will no doubt knock a number of those, let's call them opportunities for the sake of argument, from people who can work at home, because these can be generated now back again by those horrible, nasty individuals that are just taking advantage of younger minds and perhaps individuals by putting in unrealistic expectations. What does this do for relationships going forward and make people expect from their partners performances which perhaps they do not want to enter into? It does make me worried. We've spoken about how AI is replacing jobs, but on all sorts of jobs, not just in the porn industry, of course, but across the board. But what will this do to our youth who are using telephones, these mobile smartphones, and probably, you know, when parents are not around, can now download with such ease unrealistic images of members of the opposite sex? At least when I went, and it was so rare to go to Soho from down where I was in Sussex, I mean, it was expensive, and I peered through there and spent 50p. At least I saw a real person, a real woman lying there, writhing, bored out of her brain, it has to be said, and the thrill for a minute that you couldn't, you know, sexually relieve yourself, if I may use that term in this booth, although I dare say some people may have done, who knows, but that just that thrill of a real person, at least that the person behind there, the lady lying on the film, who knew what, on the bed, knew what she was doing and was trying to make money, at least it was a genuine natural body, and each one would have been different. With this AI stuff, it is taking it to another degree. And again, it is an attack on the young minds, especially if you can swap the anatomy in such a way that perhaps younger people who are a little bit dysphoric, I think, and not quite sure of who they are and are being told in the schools that they may not be the gender that they're told, and think that perhaps they can aspire to these unrealistic, strangely created AI figures. I think we have a more worrying time ahead for the young people, that somehow we need to get our active minds against, to push back against all of this. I'm not quite sure how we do that, and I'm sorry to babble on about it, but I think this has to be addressed. So thanks, Tim, from Fair Play Now, for taking me down this route, a route I hadn't even considered until now. But it is a worrying development, and I'm sure somewhere along the line we will, like in all of these things, we will find the solutions and combat yet another terror to face us all.